So let's talk about plate lunches. What is the best Hawaiian plate lunch? I'm talking about the champion of champions when it comes to lunchtime. Like when you're standing in line and you're looking at the menu and you're trying to figure out what to eat for lunch that day. In Hawaii, people love to eat, and having eaten way more plate lunches than I probably should have in my lifetime, I like to rank the best plate lunch dishes in Hawaii. I won't be ranking the individual restaurants, but rather the dishes themselves, and I'll be using the standard tier system. We'll start with chicken, then beef, pork, and close with seafood. And disclaimer, these opinions are just my own and are very subjective. I feel like I gotta mention that because some people get so defensive in Hawaii when it comes to food. In case you're not sure what a plate lunch is, it's basically a plate like this with rice, some kind of main entree, usually a meat, macaroni salad, and some kind of gravy or sauce. We don't count the calories. Chicken katsu. Pretty much S tier. Probably the most common plate lunch you'll find in Hawaii, though don't quote me on that. It was probably the first plate lunch I ever ate. It's basically breaded chicken that is fried and sliced to perfection. Some people like with katsu sauce, but me, not so much. There are so many places to get it. It's kind of hard to screw up. But I remember back in college in Colorado, one of the dining halls used to have chicken katsu on Thursday nights, and so some of us from Hawaii, we would run all the way over there to make sure that we got chicken katsu before they ran out. BBQ chicken. Nothing wrong with barbecue chicken. This is my brother's favorite plate lunch since I've known him. The chicken is usually soft and moist, great flavoring on the outside, and then you have this charred marks on the chicken. It makes it look kind of nice. You usually get 3 to 4 pieces of chicken in a regular sized plate lunch, but I've seen as many as 5, and those were the lucky days. I would say if you don't know what you'd like to eat at a plate lunch place, barbecue chicken is a pretty good choice. Simple, yet tasty. Garlic chicken. All right, sorry garlic chicken, but C- for you. And I know there are great places for garlic chicken. Let me just explain. I think garlic chicken tastes okay, but it's kind of a risky choice because you have to trust the cook to not overpower the taste of the chicken with too much garlic. I've had some really good garlic chicken, but I've had much more bad garlic chicken. Besides, it leaves you with stink breath. Shoyu chicken. We actually ate a lot of shoyu chicken growing up at home. My mom would make it in this huge pot and oh, it tastes so good. But as I've grown older, sometimes the shoyu chicken tastes a little bit too salty. And if you've ever mistakenly bit into a piece of ginger, whew, so many times I've bitten into that piece of ginger and it's like I can't taste anything else for like an hour. You also have to be careful about the shoyu sauce in the plate lunch container because unless the rice soaks up all the shoyu, you're probably gonna spill it in the car and it's gonna smell like shoyu for like a week. Mochiko chicken. This one is kind of hit or miss for me. Really depends on my mood. It's basically like fried chicken with a little extra flavoring. If I had to choose, I actually would prefer the plain karaage, which is Japanese fried chicken. Because again, the same problem as with the garlic chicken. If the flavoring is too strong, it just doesn't taste good. Korean chicken. This one is my wife's favorite at Zippy's, and sometimes I'll ask for a bite, but most times I don't. And that's how I know it's just not in my taste preference. Korean chicken has a unique flavoring to it. But I think for me, when it comes to fried chicken, I rather just have it simple and plain. Meat June. If you've never tried Meat June, it's one of those things to try in Hawaii. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's really tasty and they usually give a lot in a plate lunch here. It's basically thinly sliced beef covered in egg and they fry it up, and the beef just tastes so good. And there's a sauce, so if you want to dip it in a sauce, you can, but not for me. Meat June is a staple at many Korean restaurants in Hawaii. It's usually my go-to when I go to eat Korean food. You usually get 2 to 3 pieces of beef, each sort of sliced into bite-sized pieces. Although I have eaten at places where they don't cut the Meat June, you gotta cut it yourself. So much easier when they cut it for you. Loco Moco. I mean, really, was there any doubt? I mean, this might be the most iconic plate lunch in Hawaii. It's really simple, but it's so good when it's done right. You just cook a hamburger patty, you put a cooked egg on it, you set it on some rice, and you put gravy over the whole thing. I love a good Loco Moco. It's so unhealthy, yet I don't really care. What I like about the Loco Mocos in Hawaii is the different taste that you'll find because, you know, the rice and the egg are generally the same across the board, but the variety in the flavors comes from the hamburger and the gravy, and sometimes you get really good combinations, sometimes not so much. But when you find that place that you like both the gravy and the hamburger, oh, so good. Beef stew. Now I know some people look down on beef stew because it's so simple and you can get beef stew on the mainland, or if you want, you can even get it in a can. But the Hawaii beef stew is sweeter than any I've tasted on the mainland. Between the Loco Moco and beef stew, for me, it's a tough call on what I'd like to get any given day. And the really good beef stew is easier to find, I think, than a really good Loco Moco. And because of that, for me, it's a safer choice if I'm going to somewhere that I've never been. Because when I eat beef stew, I love eating the chunks of potato and carrots with those huge juicy squares of beef that melt, it's so good. And what's nice is if they put the beef stew on top of all of the rice, then all you gotta do is just scoop it up with some rice and some beef stew, and you know you're never gonna have extra rice at the end. Teri Beef. Don't get me wrong, Teri Beef is good. It makes up 25% of my favorite zip pack, but on its own, it kind of falls short for me. The Teri Beef meat is very flavorful, but it can kind of be a little stringy at times. And the thing about Teri Beef is that it's good, but it kind of just feels like a side dish, not a main entree in and of itself. Hamburger steak. Okay, so how can hamburger steak be so low and yet Loco Moco be so high? I mean, it's basically the same dish minus the egg. And that's the thing. The egg is what adds the character to the Loco Moco. I mean, if you've ever poked the egg on the Loco Moco and then you watch as the yellow yolk drips down and mixes with the gravy and all the hamburger on the rice. Because with a hamburger steak, it's kind of boring. I mean, yes, there's the gravy and the tasty hamburger, but you know, as I'm eating that, I'm just thinking to myself, I should have just gotten the Loco Moco. Kalbi. This is a tough one. Taste-wise, Kalbi is so tasty. The meat is always good. I don't think I've ever had a bad Kalbi plate. The main problem is that it's a challenge to eat. I mean, the thing tastes good every single time, and yet I find myself struggling to cut the meat and pull the meat off the bone, and it's so stringy. I mean, at the end of the day, I just don't want to have to work that hard to eat something that tastes so good. In a lot of ways, I just wish they would debone the Kalbi just so I could just have the meat. Of course, that kind of takes away from the look of it and what we're used to seeing. But as far as taste goes, it's really great. And this is the reason why Kalbi is usually one of the most expensive plates at a Korean barbecue. Kalua Pig and Laulau. I feel like you have to be in the right kind of mood or mindset to eat Kalua Pig or Laulau unless you're at a luau. As the only real Hawaiian food, and I use that term loosely, Kalua Pig and Laulau is probably what the tourists try the most when they eat like Hawaiian food. If you're not familiar with Kalua Pig and Laulau, it's basically salted pulled pork wrapped in what's basically collard greens. I remember the first time I tried collard greens in Colorado, I was blown away, not because it was particularly good, but it almost tasted like laulau. And it's always fun to eat Kalua Pig when you know it comes from the ground. I mean, they set up the emu and they cook it overnight. But it's probably one of those foods that I couldn't really eat a lot. It's pretty salty, but again, you just gotta be in that right mood. Roast pork. I don't know if you remember back in school, but there was always that one really good school lunch that the kids got super excited about. And in Hawaii, that was roast pork. I mean, the roast pork was good, but it was the gravy that made it taste so good at school. We've been going to a local farmer's market in the area, and one of the vendors makes really good roast pork, and it only costs $10 for the regular size, and they give plenty. The pork is really tasty, but then they add this nice creamy mushroom sauce. Not anything fancy, but perfect for the local taste buds. Grilled ahi. I don't know about you, but when it comes to plate lunches, I'm not that excited about the seafood options. I mean, I like fish and grilled ahi tastes good, but I think the flavor is kind of bland and boring. Some people try to flavor it with fancy coatings, but the meat, it just turns out so dry. So yeah, not really my thing. Garlic shrimp. I know garlic shrimp is very popular on Oahu, especially on the North Shore, but I honestly haven't eaten that much of it. I mean, it's good, messy and stink and all of that, but it tastes good. It's just that when I'm eating a plate lunch, I'm really not trying to use my hands a lot. I mean, basically I want fork to mouth, fork to mouth. There's usually not a lot of meat on the shrimp, and they're not gonna give you like 20 pieces. So because of the cost of the plate, for me, I'm usually hungry after and I have to eat something else. So flavorful, but not something I'd particularly pick. Mahi Mahi. All right, but it's gotta be fried. None of that grilled Mahi Mahi. I mean, it's a nice fish, and between ahi and Mahi Mahi, I'm pretty much taking Mahi Mahi all the time. But if it's not covered in breadcrumbs and fried up, not really that interested. It's also pretty expensive, so I usually tend to avoid it. So here's my tier list. I hope that you enjoyed that. Please let me know how you would rank these plate lunches in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and aloha.
Hello.